It's London Beat, thinking about you. You're on DCFM 88.9. I hope you're enjoying your Wednesday morning so far. I've got Mathew Dickerson in the studio, here ready for Tech Talk today. How are you, Matthew?
You put that song on just for me, did you?
I did.
You've been thinking about me all morning.
I have been thinking
so
about you.
sweet.
You know what? I do want to say thank you for filming the show last week, the Tech Talk.
Yeah, it's something I started with Richard a little while ago because obviously not everyone gets the chance to listen. They might be busy, they mightn't be available at that time. And we used to post the audio of the actual clip each week, but then we thought it's a little bit of a visual medium these days, so it's nice to be able to put the video up there as well, and so people can see that and they can listen to it if they want, or hopefully tune in live to DCFM.
Yeah, it was great. And I actually realised I've never done any filming in the studio here before.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it was really nice for me to see that. And we're talking about tech stuff. It took you, what, 2 or 3 minutes to put up a couple of basic cameras around the studio today, and here we are, we're off and running, and it makes for a great product, which then leads to great promotion.
And it's interesting when you say a couple of basic cameras. I mean, they're smartphones that I use, iPads and smartphones that I use, and the cameras on smartphones now are incredibly sophisticated, and a lot of that sophistication comes through the actual power of the phone more so than the actual quality of the lens. The lens is a tiny little lens, but what happens after the light comes through that lens is where you get the real value in seeing pretty good imagery.
Or the digital makeup stuff. Yeah. And a couple of little lapel mics, I should mention those too, just to really get the vocal, because obviously this mic sounds good and whatever, but you're capturing the audio from these little lapel mics, which are good.
Yeah, that's right, a couple of little Rode mics, and they're only a fairly new thing that have come out. Probably 3 or 4 months ago I got those, and it was always hard to get a decent mic to get some good audio into a smartphone, but these little lapel mics are relatively cheap. They go over a reasonable distance, and you can actually feed two, and exactly what I'm doing now. I've got a mic on you, a mic on me, feeding those through into one channel.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into Tech Talk.
Sure.
Okay, so
we've done half of Tech Talk already.
yeah. I love cars. I'm obsessed, and I'm intrigued by these new electric cars. I know you've got a Tesla and you love it. So they're talking about a couple of new electric cars today. There's a Hummer, one of the world's largest vehicles. They're going to try and go green with it. Let's start there.
It just seems incredible to me that a Humvee, I mean, you think of a Hummer and you think of either things like the Gulf War, which they were originally made as a military vehicle, but then some very well-heeled people decided that they'd like one just to drive around the streets of LA, for example. And so they started making production vehicles out of them. But you see Hollywood stars, movie stars driving around their Hummers, and obviously the whole idea is to show that you've got more money than the next guy and that you're bigger and more important because your car is bigger and louder and more powerful. Well, for anyone that was going to make an electric vehicle, Humvee would not have been the first brand that came to mind, but they are in fact making an electric vehicle, but they're doing it in the Humvee style. They're making a Hummer that's got 1,000 horsepower, 1,900 Newton meters of torque, and when you consider, say, a Toyota Hilux, which is a popular car and a good little car, it's got 4 times the amount of torque as a Toyota Hilux. So all this rubbish about you can't use an electric vehicle to tow, I mean, this thing would tow a 747. I mean, it's quite an incredible machine, but it is great to see that someone like Humvee is going, you know what, our future is not in making these big, powerful, loud, petrol guzzling machines. Our future is in making these big, powerful, quiet electric vehicles. The only thing I haven't been able to find out at this stage is a price, but I can't imagine it's a cheap price. I mean, Hummers aren't cheap at the best of times, but I can't imagine this particular vehicle is going to be a cheap vehicle. It still does, even at the size of a Hummer, it still does 0 to 100 in about 3 seconds. So it's still pretty impressive performance.
I think, yeah, electric vehicles, they're starting to know, definitely the power's there, there's no mistaking that, but the gearing is another thing too. A lot of them are just a single gear or a two-stage gearing thing, which I think for towing potentially could be good.
Well, it reduces the complexity as well. I mean, the quote for my vehicle, my particular electric vehicle, is that there are only 43 moving parts in the entire vehicle. And again, when you think about that, that means that maintenance for an electric vehicle is very low because there are so few moving parts. You haven't got an engine with a crankshaft and pistons and things that are wearing out, and a whole range of components of a normal internal combustion engine can wear out, but an electric vehicle is obviously very low maintenance.
Very good. And Hyundai's really upped their game in the last consistently over time, I think. They've got a new electric vehicle coming out too called the Kona.
Yeah, and I think this is probably going to be one that really jumps into the mainstream. So we're talking about a Hummer, we're talking about Tesla. They're usually at the top end because of their price. And that's been one of the complaints about electric vehicles, or they're too expensive, or the cheaper ones, and I had a Nissan Leaf a few years ago, and I love the Nissan Leaf, beautiful little car, but it only had a 170 kilometre range. So it was great for running around Dubbo, but driving to Sydney was a bit of a pain. So they've been the two complaints, whereas I think the Kona is the first vehicle that's really going to get that right mix between good range, good reasonable vehicle to be able to use day to day, and at a reasonable price. And when I say reasonable price, it's still a bit expensive. It's $65,000, which still sounds like an expensive vehicle, but I've done some calculations around the total cost of ownership. And when you take, say, over a 5-year lifespan, the cost of your fuel and the maintenance, and we just talked about the maintenance on the Hummer, for example, when we talk about the fuel and the maintenance on a normal petrol engine car compared to an electric vehicle, there's probably an extra $20,000 in costs. So a $65,000 Kona might be the equivalent of around, say, a $45,000 petrol engine car. So it makes it a bit more reasonable. Again, it's not the real cheap first car you might go out and buy, but for someone that wants to get a car that's a family car, it's an SUV, for example, so it's got a bit of room in it, you've got a couple of kids that you want to have a bit of room in the car, I think it's a pretty good option, and the range is pretty good. It's 450 kilometres. Again, some people say, oh, I want to be able to drive across the Nullarbor. Well, I've never driven across the Nullarbor, and I don't know many people that have, apart from truck drivers that do it all the time. Yeah. So you don't...
Tool for the job.
Yeah, it is. The average Aussie only drives 300 kilometres in an average week. So 450 kilometres is a good range, and that gives us enough from Dubbo, for example, to get to Sydney. So you can do that. There are charging points along the way, but I think the Kona is going to be one, but it's going to be the first of many, Clint. And this is what's happening now. We're getting to the stage where 2020, I can see a big year for electric vehicles in Australia.
Absolutely. It's been building, and now it does feel like it's going to flow on pretty quickly. Yeah. Toyota is right behind it. They've been gearing up for a long time as well. Google Photos, they're doing this 8 monthly subscription thing. I don't know much about this. What's happening with this?
It's in the US only at the moment, but it's interesting. There are a lot of companies out there that are working out that their business model going forward is not about selling a product, taking someone's money, and that's the end of it. They're all trying to work out a way that they can get a subscription service. And Google obviously sells lots of ads. That's their main source of income, selling ads from their search page. But they're looking at other ways to generate revenue. Now, a lot of people store photos on Google Drive, so they've come up with this idea where you pay $8 a month and automatically Google will select from a few choices that you make your 10 best photos and send you the old traditional 4x6 print. Now, you're a bit too young, Clint, to remember the days when you used to have a camera, you'd take it into a camera store and wait a day or two, and suddenly someone came out with same-day processing, which was really exciting, but to see whether your photos were any good. And digital took all that away. You can see those photos instantly. That's fantastic. But I think there's a little bit of a retro idea here where you like the idea of the physical photos, stick it up on the wall in your bedroom, or have something to stick in a photo album, a traditional photo album. So their idea is to start charging people $8 a month. You get the 10 photos automatically chosen, and you get those in the physical format. Okay. I'm not the biggest fan of the idea because I like the idea of digital, and I use digital frames around my house. I use digital frames at my workplace so that I can show those photos on a digital format. I don't need the physical photos, but I know a lot of people who still like the idea of the physical photo and the idea that someone's just automatically selecting the 10 best photos each month. I like that idea as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about handwriting a letter and posting it to someone. It's kind of like paying Google to do that for you.
It's a little bit like old school, isn't it? And you say, hey, you go and pick out my best ones for me and send them out to me. Yeah.
Wait on the mailman, go out there and get them each month.
Yeah, there might be, maybe they're hitting on something here. It doesn't get me excited, but maybe they're hitting on something out there.
Subscriptions on digital things are definitely the go, and I think that's one thing that I'm noticing about this story. So if you're someone who purchases software, with music, we purchase all these little plugins, which one might do a reverb and then another does something else. Yeah. So these companies are encouraging you to sign up to a monthly subscription when we'll give you the lot. So instead of just having a small purchase, we'll keep you on our roster and we'll just give you everything.
That's right.
And this is definitely somewhere that internet-based companies can generate revenue.
Yeah, that's right. It's the model. It's the holy grail of what they're all searching for, is that ongoing subscription service.
For sure. One last one maybe. This one's the Motorola Razr, famous phone. It's been reimagined. Yep. And it's going to be expensive as.
It is. I was actually quite surprised how expensive they talked about the Razor, and the Razor, of course, if you look at Australian terms, back around 2004 to 2006 was the Razor, the original Razor's heyday. 1.2 million phones were sold in that period in Australia. When you consider the size of the Australian mobile phone market, that's a very large number of sales for the Australian market. So, very popular phone. Motorola obviously isn't the force that it once was in terms of mobile phones. They once were the number one mobile phone company. They're not anymore. And this is a bit of the start of their comeback. They want to get back, and they want people talking about Motorola in the premium space, because at the moment they really just talk about Samsung and Apple in that premium space. So they want to be talked about in that premium space. So they've made the Razor. It's the old traditional flip-up phone like the original Razor was. So it's nice if you've got, say, smaller hands or pockets you want to put it in, or even a handbag if you want to just be able to drop it in. It's nice and small. And when it flips up, it is a foldable screen. So unlike the Galaxy Fold, the Samsung phone, it folds out side to side. This one folds up, as in flips up, and then you've got the full screen all the way down.
Oh,
so
wow.
Again, there's always a concern about a foldable screen in these early days about the longevity of that screen, but the Motorola say that they've got a screen that's much more reliable than the original Samsung screens that came out. In its folded state, you've still got some basic information that shows in the back of the phone, so you can pull the phone out of your pocket, look at the time, check a couple of messages that might come through, but then to use the full smartphone capabilities, you open it up. But the pricing, it's $2,699 in Australia. It'll be released towards the end of February, the 24th of February it'll be released. Obviously it'll be on plans. People won't pay that outright price, they'll put it on a plan, but that still relates to how much you'll pay for your plan. But some of the specs are a little bit disappointing. The processor, for example, is about 18 months old. The other premium manufacturers are putting the same processor in their phone a year and a half ago. Motorola's just bringing it out now. The battery's a bit smaller than we'd like it to be in terms of its capacity, but again, they're trying to put it into a small package. So I'm not convinced that it's worthy of the price tag that's on it. I mean, that's an expensive phone in terms of relative to other smartphones, other high-end smartphones in the market. So I'm not convinced about that, but there's certainly a nostalgia value, and I'll be interested to see if people jump on that nostalgia.
Yeah, I'm wondering that too, if there is that nostalgia thing with, just the fact that it's a bit of a novelty. That's right, if you get a piece of steel and flop it back and forth along a seam, after a while it's going to break. That's right. So hopefully they've got something really cool happening with that.
Yeah.
And about it being a premium product, I do commend that idea with if you want your product and your brand to be the best, and it's the most expensive, and you try and aim for that, as long as you can meet, like you said, as long as they're not skimping out on the actual product, that concept is a good one.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, and I feel like Australia in general, we should, I'd encourage businesses to focus on that, just doing something really, really well, and not trying to compete with the China cheaper stuff, just doing really high quality products and doing them well. So, I mean, that's not Motorola specific there at all. That's just a way of thinking that you see in places like Switzerland as well, where they do the watchmaking and the things like that. Yeah. But yeah, with Motorola and the Razor, what do you reckon? Is it going to go any good?
Well, I'm intrigued by the fact that it's a different form factor, so that's a good thing. I'm just not convinced that it will sell to the same volume because of those lower specs and the high price. Yeah. So I like the idea that there is competition. I like the idea there's a different form factor, but I just don't know they've nailed it. But this is the first reiteration of this phone. So the next model or the next model or the next model might be the ones, but what we definitely need is someone else to come along and challenge the Samsung Apple duopoly, because we want more competition. Ultimately, that leads to better products for you and I.
Yeah, see, that's a nice way of thinking too. I'm not as into the phone world as you are, and like you're saying, competition is probably the key point as well there.
Absolutely.
All right, awesome. Well, that was a fun tech talk. Thanks for coming in, doing it again. I won't be here next Wednesday, I don't think. We'll be back with Richard.
Back with Richard, that's all right.
We'll
survive.
Yeah, I'll see you around the place.
All right,
let's bit of rock and roll with Dead Star here on DCFM 88.9.